So the agenda, what we're going to have a look at over the next 45, 50 minutes or so, I'll just do a couple of slides at the outset, just to kind of set the scene about what we're talking about. We're talking about runway safety with a particular emphasis on runway incursions and the dangers that they provide, and also what we can do as aviators to try and mitigate some of the risks associated with runway incursions. Then I'll hand over to Brian, Captain Brian Greeves, who's going to give us his particular view of the world with regards to runway safety. And we're looking forward to hearing what Brian has to say to us. If we do have time afterwards, we'll dive into some questions and some discussion through the chat window that you can access by hitting that chat bubble up on the top of your screen. Then just to reiterate a few key points at the end to take away with, and then we can hopefully wind this up and have you have you out of here. And as I said, we hope to get the webinar finished in about 45 to 50 minutes or so. So with regards to setting the scene, runway incursions, they really do remain a major global safety concern, not just in Australia, but all over the world. Of course, the most deadly accident in aviation history, which Brian will allude to a little bit later, was essentially a runway incursion. It occurred on the ground between two 747s taking off in the Canary Islands back in 1977, a long time ago, but more than 500 people perished in that. And although a lot has been done, of course, since then to try and prevent runway incursions, the threat remains of these very high consequence events. That threat still persists if we get things wrong. One of the things that I'd like you to perhaps just keep in the back of your mind as we go through our presentation this afternoon is that runway incursions and runway safety impacts all airport users. It impacts air traffic control, the traveling public. It's not just an airline thing. Many people tend to think that runway incursions are really just an airline thing, but it involves all users of airports, GA, helicopters, military, aerial work, student pilots, and experienced pilots. No one is immune to the risks of runway incursion. And finally, it's also not just an issue for controlled airports. I know we have put today's webinar in the section of our pilot safety campaign that deals with controlled airports. However, this is not just a controlled airport issue. They are certainly relevant to the non-controlled environment as well, because in the non-controlled aerodrome environment, we don't have the luxury of a second set of eyes in a control tower on a ground or tower frequency, giving us required clearances and looking over our shoulder and warning us of potential conflict. So even if you don't do a lot of flying in the controlled aerodrome environment and you spend most of your flying life in the CTAF environment, there is still some very, very relevant information that you can take away with you this afternoon. A little bit more of setting the scene. Nice photo there. If I had a chocolate frog, I'd give a chocolate frog to anyone that can tell me where that shot was taken. Runway 32 left. If anyone wants to hazard a guess, throw it in the chat. But it's in Australia, and yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in there. One thing I want to be, I suppose, emphasise throughout the whole of our presentation today is that the runway environment is a very hazard-rich environment. Brian is going to show you some statistics later on, but although aircraft actually colliding on runways is not a common occurrence, there's still a very real potential for one of these events to be catastrophic. And we certainly have had some near misses in Australia involving jet airline aircraft. Runway safety is one of those things that we can't take for granted. And, you know, as I said earlier, major occurrences might be rare, but they certainly can be high consequence. All of us involved in the industry, from the regulator to the airlines, air traffic control, air services, pilots, people driving vehicles on movement areas, we all have a role to play. We need to keep investing time and effort into incursion prevention, and we all need to get better at it. But I suppose the good thing And well done, everyone. For those of you that said Launceston, yep, Launceston is runway 32 left there. Nice pickup. There are significant mitigators. We do have tools at our disposal that we can have in our kit bag to try and reduce the risk of suffering a runway incursion. Much of what Brian is going to talk about soon involves this and is centered around, in many respects, the good news that we do have mitigators that we can put into place to help improve safety on and around our runways. And look, just like any system that involves human beings, and we're all subject to error, there's all sorts of things that it can impact on runway incursions. Things like a lot of human factors, for example, distraction, fatigue, loss of situational awareness, complacency, stress. We are, at the end of the day, the human being in the system. So it's a really good opportunity today just to have a bit of a look at this. What I'm going to do now is just hand over to Brian, who is going to take us through his presentation, which is really the crux of what we're doing this afternoon. Brian is as I said at the outset, is an airline pilot of many years' experience, both in Australia and around the world. Very active with Ozalpa and also part of the National Runway Safety Group here in Australia. And Brian will chat a little bit more about that. So without any further ado, Brian, I might just hand over to yourself and I can flick through the slides for you.
Okay, thanks very much, Tim. Tim has asked me to speak on runway safety and specifically, as we heard, on runway incursions and some of the ways we can use to help prevent them. So go to the next slide, please. Okay, first a little bit of a commercial. Who is Ozalpa? Australian Airline Pilots Association, or Ozalpa, is a member association of the International Federation of Airline Pilots Association, IFALPA. We represent 7,200 professional pilots in Australia. We're an umbrella organisation and we consist of two associations, the Australian International Pilot Association and the Australian Federation of Airline Pilots. We are responsible, as in Ozalpa, for the safety and technical matters, including representation at forums such as the National Runway Safety Group, of which I'll speak more later. We have 7 portfolios, including air traffic services, an aerodrome and ground environment, both of which are involved in runway safety. Next slide, please, Tim. Okay, today we will discuss runway incursion, the categories and where they occur. I will explain to you the role of the National Runway Safety Group and the local runway safety teams. I will show you, hopefully, an excellent air services movie on runway safety, and then after that we'll discuss in more detail some of the measures that came up in that and also additional ones to prevent runway incursions, including the use of runway stop bars. As Tim said, this should give us time for some questions, which I'll do my best to answer, but no promises. Next slide, please. So what is a runway incursion? The CASA definition, which is in line with the international ICAO 1, is the incorrect presence of an aircraft, vehicle or person on the protected area of the surface designated for landing and takeoff of aircraft. I think Iman came on the chat and was querying whether Tenerife actually counted as one. I would definitely say it is, and certainly in all the literature, it is down there. So those of you who don't know what occurred, the KLM aircraft was lined up for takeoff. It was foggy conditions, inadvertently started the takeoff run when a Pan Am aircraft was cleared to cross the runway, and as you can see that they collided with a large loss of life. Next slide, please. So the 5 categories of runway incursion. E is when there's insufficient information, whilst the scenarios which we see here from D to A show increasing severity from little or no risk of collision to barely avoiding a collision. In each of the cases, the taxiing aircraft penetrated the runway safety area, crossed the hull point, and a collision hazard or loss of separation with landing aircraft occurred. Next slide, please. So in Australia, between the period 2018 and 2022, there were 570 reported runway incursions, with an average of approximately 12 pilot attributed runway incursions occurring every month. If you look at the statistics down towards the bottom left, you'll see that most are category D. Nevertheless, all have the potential to result in a fatal collision between the aircraft and aircraft or a vehicle. Next slide, please.
Just a quick question while I have you there, Brian.
Yes.
Do we have any figures on ATC attributed runway incursions? Because the way I understand it, that slide is pilot attributed. Do we have any figures on what
yes,
percentage?
we do. And in the National Runway Safety Group, Air Services at those meetings present the statistics, and we can look and see where those are. One of the slides I removed was actually the definitions of when there's a deviation, so we can have where a controller gets the separation too close, or where a controller inadvertently takes over from another controller. A good example is crossing a runway where a ground controller gives clearance without consulting with the person that owns the runway, the tower controller.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, so those figures are available is the short answer. So three most common runway incursions are incorrect runway crossing by an aircraft or vehicle without or contrary to ATC clearance or due to incorrect ATC clearance, incorrect spacing between successive arriving or arriving and departing or departing and arriving aircraft, and finally, landing without ATC clearance. Next slide, please. So where do most runway incursions occur in Australia? And the answer is Metro D aerodromes. And why should that be? First of all, let's not exclude major aerodromes, because runway incursions do occur from time to time, particularly associated with crossing illuminated stop bars. And I'll talk more of that later. So why Metro Ds? There are several factors, including the layout, reduced system level precautions, as well as the nature of airspace activity present. And any of you operating in places like Moorabbin, Bankstown, and so forth will be very aware of this. Furthermore, each aerodrome has a unique set of factors that contribute to the risk of runway incursions. And this is where you come from. This is where you can help. Sorry. Pilots' familiarity with these local factors, along with compliance with ATC instruction, effective communication, and situation awareness, can help reduce the risk of runway incursions. Next slide, please.
Yeah, just before I do that, Brian, Lewis just texted in on the chat. Where do these stats actually come from? Are they Air Services?
So Air Services prepare these. Obviously, if it's something that was extremely serious, that's going to be reported to the ATSB. But the Air Services, there is a person within Air Services who each 6 months or less comes together with the National Runway Safety Group, confers with CASA, and then presents the statistics as a whole. But in the meantime, obviously, there is interaction between Air Services, where they are at a controlled aerodrome, and the aerodrome operator.
Right, thanks, mate.
So we don't just wait until the 6 months, we actually take account of those. And also at the local runway safety teams, those are the sort of figures that we would look at, particularly if we identified there was a spot or a particular reason why these were occurring, and then try and take action to prevent them. So again, back to a few statistics. When we break down the contributing factors, we see that non-compliance with AIP procedures, taxi instructions, and runway clearance, coupled with communication, accounts for 89% of pilot attributed runway incursions. And I think the closest I've ever come to having a serious runway incursion was taxiing out from San Francisco. It was at night. They were operating single frequency. We lined up for takeoff. With the pilot monitoring, I thought that I heard the clearance for us to take off. Fortunately, the first officer queried, we asked again and stopped the takeoff. And meantime, an aircraft on the cross runway took off ahead of us. So communications are a major part of this, and we're all susceptible to them. Next slide, please. So what is the role of the National Runway Safety Group? So as its name implies, it's part of the state safety program with the specific remit to improve runway safety, including trying to reduce runway incursions. It does this by using feedback from forums and other sources to develop and implement national strategies to improve runway safety. Next slide, please. So present members from all sectors of aviation community, including CASA, the Department, Air Services, ATSB, Defence, Airports Association, Royal Flying Doctor Service, AOPA, RAAA, Recreational Aviation, and Ozalpa. Next slide, please.
Just before I do, Brian, I think that slide is important because at the outset we said that runway incursions are not just an issue for the big end of town. It's quite gratifying to see, organisations such as RAOZ involved in this type of stuff as well.
Okay, thank you. Was there another question I saw up there as well?
No, that's all good.
Okay, all right, thank you. And other members, not to exclude, obviously, the operators of capital city airports, very active Metro D airports and regional airports, together with the airlines. And we can see that all of the domestic airlines pretty much are covered there, and major flying schools and training organizations. Next slide, please. So some examples of what we're doing at the National Runway Safety Group at the moment. We're using data, and remember, we're talking about the data. Where does the data come from, the statistics? So we look at those carefully, trying to work out if there are any common parts, as we can see, to reduce runway incursions. Examining why pilots cross illuminated stop bars and making recommendations to help prevent these occurrences. Ken Alcott, I think, who's on the website, led that working group, and we've already come up with some what I think are good recommendations. Trying to make NOTAMs more user-friendly, working to implement the global reporting format, working to reduce call sign confusion, which obviously is a big part of this, providing education and information, and using lessons learned from local runway safety teams.
Yeah, I know, Brian, talking to the air traffic controllers at places like Moorabbin, if large flying schools have very similar fleets, they might have, 25, predominantly white Cessna 172s. If a number of them are lined up at different holding points, it can be it can certainly lead to error.
Yeah, and obviously at the major airports we see peak times, Qantas aircraft departing with similar call signs, the same for
Yep.
Rex and so forth. So it is an issue, and I know the operators are taking it seriously. They're trying to look at how best to do it. In other parts of the world, I don't know if you're aware of this, Tim, but they use a alphanumeric. I think
Yeah.
Emirates uses alphanumeric. So every time there's a unique call sign to prevent this occurring.
Yep.
Okay, so that brings us nicely to the role of the local runway safety teams. So as the slide says, local runway safety teams are an important component of the National Runway Safety Program, and I would actually say that they're essential. So the local runway safety team consists of local representatives addressing local runway safety issues. I'm presently a member of the Sydney and Melbourne teams, and definitely we look at the what is going on at those two airports, and also looking at, in the case of Melbourne, the development of the third runway. At some airports, the local runway safety team is embedded in another aerodrome meeting, such as aerodrome user groups. If you could just go back one, please.
Oh, my apologies.
Okay. Such as aerodrome user group or airplane or airport safety committee. The name doesn't matter. What's important are the practical measures the local runway safety team takes to improve runway safety. So my message to you, if you don't have one, set one up now. Next slide, please. This schematic shows the relationship between the National Runway Safety Group and the local runway safety teams. So the outcome of the local runway safety teams are used to inform the National Runway Safety Group to enable national trends to be identified and develop strategic programs which can then be implemented nationally. Obviously, while we're interested in sorting local problems in a local way, what we don't want to do is to go so we're completely a non-standard and every airport is so unique that nobody operating into it from outside really understands what's going on. So that's why it's important to have national strategies as well as to have local solutions. In turn, the National Runway Safety Group provides feedback to the local runway safety teams. But as I've mentioned here, any local runway safety matter is directed to the local runway safety team at the respective aerodrome. Next slide. Sorry, just before we go there, Tim. So now hopefully we will watch the Excellent Air Services video on pilot runway safety. We had a few glitches as we tried to run it earlier. It runs for about 5.5 minutes. I think it's excellent. So hopefully we can show it. So over to you, Tim.
All right. I'll attempt to play this video. We had a few glitches beforehand, and I know some people are getting a little bit of poor audio this afternoon. But if you can, and yes, we will, Iman, we will provide a link to the video, of course, for you to view afterwards. If you can hear the video, just give me a quick thumbs up on the chat. So we'll see how we go.
Air Services considers runway safety to be a serious threat to aviation safety. We work with industry to manage runway safety risks across our towered locations. Class D controlled aerodromes are complex, busy, and involve diverse aviation activities. The airport design and procedures allow for many aircraft movements, but errors can easily result in runway safety occurrences. At these aerodromes, our air traffic controllers experience high task demands, reducing their ability to detect pilot errors before they result in a safety occurrence, such as a runway incursion. This video will assist you to understand how you can contribute to improving runway safety outcomes. Your flight preparation is critical. Ensure you allocate adequate time to fully understand taxiway and runway layouts applicable to your flight. Review the aerodrome chart, familiarising yourself with current local procedures and restrictions, such as those published in the En route Supplement Australia and Notices to Airmen. Keep the chart available as you taxi. Aerodrome markings, information signs, and lights are installed to assist you to follow correct taxi routes. Ensure you are familiar with these and their meaning. If in doubt, refer to the Aeronautical Information publication for further information. All runways and helipads are active during published air traffic control hours and require a clearance to enter, cross, backtrack, or taxi on. When navigating around an aerodrome, pay attention to complex intersections that may result in confusion on the direction to take. Effective pilot-controller communications are critical to runway safety. The potential for communication errors is decreased by using published standard phraseology that helps avoid misunderstanding the intent of transmissions. Before requesting taxi clearance, listen to the current automatic terminal information service and determine the runway in use. This will assist you anticipate what taxi instructions you may be issued. Obtain your airways clearance before your taxi clearance. This will reduce the amount of information you need to retain and read back. Good radio techniques also assist minimise errors. Be prepared. Know what you are going to say before transmitting. Avoid over-transmitting other pilots or air traffic control, and always check and cross-check you are transmitting on the correct frequency. If you are not familiar with the aerodrome, request detailed taxi instructions from air traffic control. They are there to assist you. Write down your taxi instructions, as this can help you to remember the clearance you are issued, and in providing the required clearance, read back. Read back required elements of the clearance as published in the Aeronautical Information publication, and always seek clarification from air traffic control if in doubt. When you commence taxiing, pay careful attention and follow all markings and signs, and continue to monitor the air traffic control frequency. Follow your cleared taxi route, referencing the aerodrome chart and signs that identify the taxiway you are on. These are a yellow marking on a black background. You may also see direction signs which identify the designations of taxiways leading to an intersection, as well as an arrow indicating the approximate course to turn to align the aircraft on the taxiway. These have black markings on a yellow background. As you approach the holding point, you'll see a marking pattern consisting of 2 or more yellow lines, some of which are solid and some of which are dashed. These are the runway holding position markings. Holding points will not be aligned with the sealed surface of the runway. They will be set back to be in line with the gable markers. When issued a clearance to taxi to a holding point, or when instructed to hold short of the runway, always stop before the first solid line of the runway holding point marking. You must obtain and read back a clearance to enter, cross, line up or take off from the designated runway before crossing from the solid side to the dashed side of a runway holding point at any aerodrome when a control tower is operating. Some aerodromes use separate frequencies for different runways. Ensure you are on the appropriate frequency for the runway you intend to use. You may be issued an instruction to line up and wait when a takeoff clearance cannot immediately be issued. Do not commence your takeoff roll until a specific takeoff clearance has been issued and you have read it back. Before entering the runway, it's a good idea to scan the full length of the runway and scan for aircraft on final approach or landing roll. Unless authorised by air traffic control, do not backtrack or hold on the runway in use. After landing, vacate the runway as soon as it is safe to do so. At locations that operate parallel runways, beware. You may need to hold short of the adjacent runway. Ensure you clear the runway and runway strip completely. You are permitted to cross from the dashed side to the solid side of a runway holding point after vacating the runway. Stop only if you are facing the solid yellow line of the next holding point. Always remember to ask air traffic control if you are unsure of the instructions provided. And, collectively, we can all work together to maintain safety on the aerodrome.
All right. Well, that seemed to work okay. I'm pleased for that. You're still on mute, Brian. You might just want to just activate your microphone. And maybe we can just talk about a few...
Did that to stop the feedback. Okay, great. Thank you, Tim.
Lovely.
All right. So picking up on some of those great tips and adding a few more. Plan your taxi. Ensure you understand aerodrome marking signs and lights. Talk a little bit more about those in a moment. Minimize heads down activities while the aircraft is moving. I think I saw Tim saying keep your eyes open and outside the cockpit. Resist the pressure to take shortcuts. Listen, comply with ATC instructions and clearances. Obtain a clearance, enter, cross, backtrack, and taxi on any runway, including runway undershoots where marked. Before entering a runway, always look out for other aircraft or vehicles on or approaching the runway. Stay alert until after the engine shut down. Next slide, please.
Yeah, that second last point that you mentioned about before entering any type of runway, always look first. Just be aware that air traffic controllers, they're human too. They make error, and they're subject to the same types of human factors that many pilots are also subject to. So that second last minute look up final or even onto early base, especially if you have to do any backtracking, can be a lifesaver.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's essential that we understand aerodrome signs, markings, and I would add lights. Probably like me, certainly many of you, I'm sure, never had a formal examination or even training on these visual aids, and I really learnt about them properly when I became involved in airport design and operations. They've been described to me as the body language of the airport, and a good knowledge of them will help you navigate the airport better and provide another safety barrier. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at the use of aerodrome diagrams as part of our pre-taxi briefing. Next slide, please. First, hotspots. Hotspots highlight locations on an aerodrome where runway incursions have happened or where there is an increased risk of one. The diagrams, which can be found in Earth or the DAP, show significant hotspots and provide recommendations to help avoid runway incursions. Next slide, please, Tim. So here are two examples, one for Bankstown and one for Moorabbin. And if we look up the Bankstown up in the left-hand corner, we can see that there is a warning there as the aircraft approaching the runway. And what it says is, positively identify the runway you are landing on. To confirm it, it is the runway you are clear to land on. So positively identify the runway you're landing on to confirm it is the runway you are clear to land on. So very, very important, particularly where you have a number of runways, as you do here, parallel runways. Next slide, please.
Yeah, just quickly, Brian, and I'm sorry I keep butting in. I just keep getting all these ideas popping into my head.
That's
Probably
right.
beyond the scope of what we're here today to talk about, but runway confusion is also a big thing. I saw a report this morning, actually, of a 737 in Australia back on the 12th of June, only a few days ago, that lined up actually on the runway side lights, not the actual runway center line. So again, it can happen.
No, it can indeed, and we didn't go into runway confusion or into runway excursions, but obviously those are a very, very important part of it, and certainly it's good practice when you're lining up to make sure that you are on the correct runway. Check the identification on the runway painted, and obviously if you have an ILS, make sure that the localizer is aligned and so forth, and those small things will help you. So I noticed that Phil asked about communications. I'm not going to go into communication with the ATC too much because Tony Macbeth, the air traffic controller, on the last webinar provided some outstanding advice for operating at a controlled aerodrome, including good readbacks. But I would like to reiterate some of it. A few seconds of readback on the radio can help stave off real trouble. As I mentioned to you about San Francisco, it's very important that when you read back, then it gives the controller an idea that you actually understand what's going on and also to pick up maybe your error. So take the time and use it carefully to make sure everyone has the same expectations. Good readbacks definitely benefit pilots as well as air traffickers. When pilot controller communication is incomplete or vague, it creates a distraction, best or worst true potential for disaster. Keeping your communication clean adds safety. And also that if you're asked to read back a clearance, you need to make sure you read back the whole clearance. So if it includes to taxi to a runway to a particular holding point, you need to read that back. Otherwise, the controller will have to come back to you until you've given the correct readback. So achieving that clarity only takes a little bit of time and discipline. And my final message is think before you speak. Next slide, please. All right. One of the technologies that are being rolled out at an Australian International Airport is runway stop bars. And I don't know if, Tim, if you could help me here, but as I go through, maybe you could use your pointer to bring these up. For those
Sure.
of you not familiar with a stop bar, we see a line of illuminated red lights. So if you go there, and those are coincidental with the solid lines of the runway hold point marking. Remember that they mentioned a number of times that you cannot cross those solid lines without clearance. The green lights, which are ahead there, remain off until the red stop bar is extinguished by the controller. Thank you. After the clearance is given. Note that both are required to cross. In other words, you need the clearance to cross and you need those lights to be extinguished. On the left, Tim, if you could bring your pointer back, we can see runway guide lights. These are often known as wig-bag lights. And further to the left, we can see the mag signs or the move area guidance, to give them their full name, and on there we see the white on red, which is a mandatory marking for a runway hold point, 16 right, 34 left, and further out to the left we see the marking, which is a location marker for taxiway golf. Okay, next slide, please. So how do we use these? First, the must. Stop at the red stoplight. never cross an illuminated stop bar, and only proceed past the stop bar when ATC provides the appropriate verbal instruction and the stop bar light is extinguished. Some recommended practices: ensure that at least one member of the crew is able to sight the stop bars. The single pilot, make sure you can see it. Check stop bars every time before entering or crossing a runway. And finally, check stop bars when reading back ATC clearance to enter the runway. Next one, please, Tim. And here are some final tips on using the stop bars. Conditional clearances will not be used if stop bars are operating. Only when contingency procedures are in place, and you can find those in URSA and the AIP, and a pilot driver is in possession of a specific ATC instruction, can an aircraft vehicle cross an illuminated stop bar. So we stop at the stop bar unless those contingency procedures, which are very clear, and the language used by the ATC controller is also very clear, then you cannot stop across that illuminated stop bar. Stop bar configuration, including raised stop bar lights and lead-on lights, can be subtly different at all aerodromes, and the URSA should be consulted prior to operating at any aerodrome. So one of the things that Ken and his working group have tried to do is to ensure as far as possible where stop bars have been installed, that they are installed and operated in a similar way as possible, but airports do differ, and therefore make sure that you are familiar with how the stop bars work at each of the airports where they are in existence. Finally, stop bars are a defense against human error and situation awareness. Remember, never cross an illuminated stop bar, and if in doubt, query ATC as to the intent of the instruction. And that probably is the best note to leave on. Anytime you're unsure, stop RSA traffic control. If you need to, as the movie said, you can always ask for taxing. I've never worried about asking what we used to call progressive taxing, certainly in somewhere like Charles de Gaulle, which is a nightmare to taxi around. So, last slide. So thank you for your attention. I hope the talk was useful. Now over to Tim to direct the questions and summarize. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Look, it's always good to have someone of Brian's considerable expertise and experience to share his knowledge with us. It's certainly much appreciated. Brian, we had a comment or a question come in from Imam on the chat for you, most likely. Do we have AMAS, ASDE, or ASSC equipped airports in Australia? You might want to just give a quick 30-second explanation as to what that is.
Okay, there are service movement radars in place. Obviously, those airports such as Sydney, where they operate down to Category 2, Melbourne down to Category 3, and so forth, those are definitely systems, as Simon said, mostly at the capital airports. Those where those particular surface radars will be in place. So obviously that is an assistance in order to move aircraft, particularly during low visibility conditions. However, this is where the red stop bars, if you like, are the goalkeeper. They're the final stop to prevent you entering a runway due to confusion, due to an error made by either by the pilot or by the controller. So I hope that answers your question, Nima.
Yeah, and look, stop bars, please don't think of them as a silver bullet that's going to save every single event. On the CASA Pilot Safety Hub, we have a video discussing an event that occurred at Perth Airport several years ago involving two Boeing 737s, one taxiing in after landing and one taking off. Stop bars were illuminated and still an aircraft did punch through the stop bar, and the two 737s missed by only 15 meters. But you can have a look at an analysis of that event on our Pilot Safety Hub.
Yeah, so that's a very good example when the airport and the operators came together along with the ATSB, looked at what had occurred, and as a result of that, actually changed some of the procedures at Perth, including eliminating that particular exit. Because it was very confusing coming off that exit onto that. So you're right, stop bars are not there. We always say in the Federation and the Association, design out the error, build in the capacity. So if it's a fundamental design, then that's what all hazard, we need to get rid of that.
Yeah, if you can eliminate the hazard, that's obviously the best way of progressing. So look, we've been going for about 45 or so minutes, so we're just getting towards the end. I just want to reiterate that this webinar has been recorded, and it will go up on our CASA Pilot Safety Hub, and that should be up within the next 24 hours or so. So you can rewatch this at your leisure. Just some key points that I want to just look at before we finish, and there is a quick little comment on the right hand side. I'll get to you if I can, but I just want to get these key points out of the way if you don't mind. So to summarize, runway incursions, really the main contributing factors I took from a lot of what Brian said was non-compliance with ATC instructions and or procedures. I suppose we as aviators, we need to listen to what is actually being said rather than perhaps what we expect might be said. And just having good old-fashioned discipline to become familiar and to remain familiar with AIP procedures. Just turn my camera back on, there you go. To help avoid runway incursions, probably three major takeaways that I'd like to leave with you. Plan your taxi route and keep your eyes outside. Minimize distraction. That's probably one of the big ones. Distraction has the potential to kill. It really does. And if unsure, as Brian said before, stop and check and clarify. Never assume. Accurate readbacks are important because standard phraseology is there for a reason, because ATC need to know that you know. It's that double check. It may seem tedious, and ACT can certainly be quite hot on readbacks, and so they should be, because they need to know that we as aviators know. And I just want to put in just another quick plug about the importance of local runway safety teams. It doesn't have to be at a large airport. It can be just a normal uncontrolled airfield. If the airport reporting officer or a group of regular pilots that fly into or out of there, or companies that might be based there, get together just a couple of times a year just to chat about runway safety. It's amazing how when heads are put together, we can cross-fertilize and get some really, really good information. And that kind of leads me on to some new advisory circulars that CASA is putting out. And these should be out by the end of the month, which is only about 2 weeks away, all things being equal. There are 5 of these, and I took that photo yesterday. There's the final draft copies on my desk. And these advisory circulars are associated with airport operations, and they do have flow-on effects to help certainly with the management of runway safety. And as I said, they'll be out in the next couple of weeks. The first one is apron safety management, airside vehicle control, wildlife hazard management, disabled aircraft removal plan, specifically, I suppose, for airport operators, and finally, local runway safety teams, including advice on how to set these things up and the types of issues that they can address. They're written essentially in plain language, and they're not very thick documents. They might only be about 3 or 4, perhaps 5 pages. So as soon as they are out, they'll be put on the website and people can make use of those. We also have CASA Safety Promotion has put out information cards as well, available from our online store, that looks at things like runway signage and that type of thing. So I certainly recommend those to you. Just a couple of quick little comments just before we let people go. Yes, Rob put in, for the non-commercial pilot, it's extremely important to check frequencies. Yes, I'd agree with that. I think all of us aviators have had finger trouble before. Moorabbin changed its ground frequency and caught me out. So yes, again, the importance of current documentation and the latest revision to AIP. Radio failure. I was flying into Moorabbin the other week and the radio was dodgy. Thank God, still operating. if in the circuit, as I was, and the radio fails, who actually sees the code 7600? And other than transmitting blind and watching the tower where able, do you keep coming inbound? And if so, getting taxi clearance is also an issue. What is the best mode of action? If I fly off to another less busy aviation, what happens to the rest of the system starts to fail? That's probably a question that we can get back to you because we're just running out of time, but an excellent question and some good comment there. If you are in radar coverage, you will 7600 will paint on Melbourne Centre's radar. Temporary displaced thresholds, yes, that can be a runway confusion issue. Some are marked by V-bars, international airports marked with runway threshold identification lights. Correct. What else have we got? Yes, major US airports are busy and complex, and a high number of high-profile incursion events, even just this year. Where do you think the FAA and the NTSB will go with this issue? Well, it's an ongoing issue, I suppose. Runway incursions, unfortunately, that they ain't going away. And I suppose it just emphasises the fact that education has to keep pushing ahead. And also, as Brian alluded to earlier, the design of runways, the design of movement area guidance signs. We need to make moving on the surface of an aerodrome, I suppose, as intuitive as possible. There are a few more, but we can get to those. People have said boom gates. That's a quick one, Brian. Just before we go, are boom gates in operation anywhere around the world, or is that kind of a bridge too far?
I've not come across them, but that's not to say that they aren't there. But
Yeah.
no, I haven't seen those.
All right, no worries. Look, we're just about out of time. We've gone for about 55 minutes or so I think our timing's just about right. A quick gratuitous advertisement again for that Pilot Safety Hub, where your safety is in your hands. Jump onto the CASA homepage. You'll see a link straight to it. All these resources, podcasts, webinars, accident investigation, discussion panels, all types of information you can go to and dive into there. And we certainly do look forward to putting out additional webinars and these types of events as we proceed into the second half of the year. So look, thank you very much, everyone. I do apologise for a few people who may have had some audio issues, but I certainly hope you found the last 45, 50 minutes of use and take away a few of those gold nuggets and hopefully can make all of our flying, and especially moving on the surface of airfields, that much more safe. Once again, thanks everyone, and we will certainly see you next time. All the best. Bye.